Hello, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Janet Elenoff. I serve as the chair of the Speakers Bureau of the League of Women Voters of Palm Beach County. Today, we're going to review the Decision 2024, a voter's guide to the 6 amendment proposals on the Florida general election ballot. First, a little history about the League. The League is nonpartisan. We do not take positions on individuals. We don't endorse candidates, and we don't not endorse candidates. We are neutral. We are political, though, because we do take positions on certain issues, and you'll see that as we go forth. The League was established in 1920, a few months before the women received the right to vote in the United States of America. Men joined the League starting in 1972. Today, in our 29 chapters in the state of Florida, approximately 20% of our members are male, and we welcome each and every single one of you. The purpose of the League is to serve our voters and promote good governance. We believe that an educated constituency leads to more involvement in the voting process. We all know that elections happen every 2 years and that the governor, cabinet, and state legislators have some term limits. This year, there'll be a number of issues and people on your ballot. We know there'll be a U.S. president, 1 United States Senate seat, and all of the House of Representatives. There'll also be some state items. We're going to focus for the rest of our conversation today on the 6 constitutional amendments. Florida's Constitution establishes rules and basic rights. The amendments need to be passed by 60%. That's called a supermajority, and it is 60% of those who vote on the amendment. So this year there are 6 amendments. You don't have to vote on all 6 of them. Your ballot is still valid. 60% of the votes are needed to pass the amendment. If 3 million people vote on an amendment, 1.8 million people are needed to pass it. If another amendment has 5 million people voting on it, then 3 million need to pass that amendment. There are different sources of how amendment proposals may appear on our ballots. Today, we're going to focus on the legislature and citizens' initiatives, since those were the sources of our 6 amendment proposals. In the legislature, 60% of the Senate and House of Representatives need to vote to pass the amendment, a supermajority. A citizens' initiative is very different. It requires, first of all, calculating 8% of the voters who participated in the 2020 presidential election. That's 891,523. I'm going to call it 892,000. 892,000 valid signatures need to be on a petition for it to go to the next level. And the supervisor of election in each county would review the signatures to make sure they're valid. The next level is that the proposed language goes to the Florida Supreme Court to make sure that the language is a single subject topic and that the topic is clear. We have 2 citizens' initiatives this year, and it took a lot of work to get them on your ballot. The first amendment we're going to talk about is partisan school board elections. sourced by the Florida legislature. So 60% of the Florida Senate and House of Representatives voted to put this ballot forward. This is the text that will appear on your ballot. The title, Partisan Election of Members of District School Boards. Proposing amendments to the state constitution to require members of a district school board to be elected in a partisan election rather than a nonpartisan election, and to specify that the amendment only applies to elections held or after the November 2026 general election. However, partisan primary elections may occur before the 2026 general election for purposes of nominating political party candidates to that office for placement on the 2026 general election ballot. I'm sure that many of us don't really know what that means. So I like to point out some of the critical phrases in an amendment so that we know what we should really be focusing on. These up to 75 words in a text can be very confusing, and you are not alone, and that's why you're here. So the big thing is that currently our school board elections are nonpartisan. Everybody who is registered can vote, can go ahead and vote on a school board member. If this amendment passes by a supermajority, 60% of those who vote on it, these elections become partisan. That means that an individual has to vote. So moving right along, it changes the school board elections from nonpartisan to partisan, and it begins in 2026. There's a lot of power in our 67 county school board. School board members are elected and serve 4-year terms. School boards control school property, organize and establish operating the schools in all of the counties, and also establishes the budget. School boards also work with each other so that there's some cohesiveness in the state. School board members are paid a salary, and in Palm Beach County, a school board member earns $46,773. If this amendment passes, school board elections, which are currently nonpartisan, become partisan, and the rules of partisan elections and races take place. That means that Republican voters would vote for Republican individuals for school boards, and Democrats would vote for Democrat in a Democratic primary. There are no primaries for no party affiliated voters. No party affiliated voters, we all know, are different than independents. Voters registered as no party affiliates or minor parties cannot by law vote in a closed primary. And that's the biggest difference with this amendment passing. If it passes, the no party affiliate and other parties will be excluded from primary voting on school board races. This will exclude approximately 30%, about 4 million of Florida's voters. So what does a yes vote mean? A yes vote means that you want partisan school board elections, and the candidates will run listing their party affiliation. A no vote maintains the status quo and will allow everybody to vote. I mentioned earlier that the Florida legislature passed this. The vote in the Senate was 29-11, and in the House, 79-34. Opposing organizations are here. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's get into Amendment 2, proposing to constitutionalize the right to fish and hunt in the state of Florida. And if it was passed, it actually wouldn't be the first state to do so. As of 2023, a total of 23 states have constitutional provisions that protect the right to fish and hunt. Now, let's see what it actually says. So, the exact text in the amendment, proposing an amendment to state constitution to preserve forever fishing and hunting, including by the use of traditional methods as a public right and preferred means of responsibly managing and controlling fish and wildlife, specifies that the amendment does not limit the authority granted to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission under Section 9 of Article 4 of the state constitution. Okay, what does it mean? So simply, it's adding a constitutional right to the people in the state of Florida to be able to fish and hunt using traditional methods. It also declares hunting and fishing as a means to manage fish and wildlife. And that very important final section there, it does not limit the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's powers. Pretty much, it would put that fishing and hunting ahead and become like the primary means of managing Florida's wildlife, which brings us to the yes and no votes. And simply, a vote for yes would create that constitutional right to fish and hunt. Now, let's give you a few opinions and arguments for why you would vote yes on Amendment 2. So, from the SE Fisheries Policy Director for American Sports Fishing Association, the sports fishing industry is important to Florida, contributing nearly $14 billion in economic output and supports more than 120,000 jobs. Now, from Florida's House Speaker Paul Renner, the amendment preserves Floridians' rights to use hunting and fishing as a means to provide for themselves and their families. And it does not get rid of the need for a permit to fish and hunt in Florida. So that means that there is no revenue lost under by passing this amendment. And at that end there, we saw that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission still has the authority to regulate hunting and fishing. It isn't becoming a free-for-all when you pass. It's just giving that constitutional right to do so. But a vote for no, and obviously the opinions that come with it, would just remain how it is. You would still be able to fish and hunt in the state of Florida. It just wouldn't be a constitutional right. Now let's give a few opinions on that side. There's actually already a statute that provides the right to fish and hunt in Florida. So some say that what is to be gained by the constitutional amendment is not much, but what you lose is the government's ability to be able to properly control hunting and fishing in the state. From the Humane Wildlife Consulting of South Florida, quote, "We are in the midst of a global extinction crisis, and wildlife needs a break from the carnage." So they also say that the planet has lost around 69% of the wildlife. Again, most of the dissent coming around this amendment is environmentally based, right? So giving this constitutional right, the fear is that we would be able to protect the environment less, and fishing and hunting would become this very dangerous thing that would happen in our state. From no22.org, using hunting and fishing as the first wrong approach, remember that primary means of controlling wildlife that we saw in the text there, for managing wildlife could have a catastrophic effect on wildlife in Florida. So when we don't use non-lethal means of controlling wildlife in the state of Florida, some fear that, again, that environmental damage could be quite prevalent in the state of Florida. So the supporting organizations of the Amendment 2 are, of course, the American Sports Fishing Association. That's where our first quote came from. The National Deer Association and the International Order of Teddy Roosevelt. These are the organizations that have outspoken and been very public in their support on Amendment 2. And of course, the opposing organizations. We have no22.org, which is where one of our quotes came from, Speak Up for Wildlife, and Speak Up Wakaiva. So those are the pros and cons and the organizations that follow each. A quick note is that in the legislative vote, because again, this was a legislative amendment, in the Senate, it passed 38-1 in favor to put it on the ballot. And in the House, it was 116-0. There is bipartisan support of this amendment. And officially, the League of Women's Voters is not taking a stance on this amendment. And then opposing organizations, oh, already said that. Let's move on. Okay, Amendment 3. So this one is probably one that you've seen in the news, and it's one of the two main ones that the news has really picked up on. So let's go over what it's doing. So pretty much it legalizes marijuana for adults 21 years and older. This is a citizens initiative proposal. And now if you've watched our previous amendments, you've seen that citizens proposals require a massive amount of signatures to get on the ballot. This was not passed in the legislature. This was something that people actually, got up in arms to get in the election as an amendment for the November election. So let's see what it actually says. The adult personal use of marijuana allows adults 21 years or older to possess, purchase, or use marijuana products and marijuana accessories for non-medical personal consumption by smoking, ingestion, or otherwise. Allows medical marijuana treatment centers and other state licensed entities to acquire, cultivate, process, manufacture, sell, and distribute such products and accessories. Applies to Florida law. Does not change or immunize violations of federal law. Establishes possession limits for personal use. Allows consistent legislation. Defines terms. Provides effective date. So you see at the end there, it starts kind of just like getting a little choppy. There's actually a word limit around amendments texts. So to be able to get this passed, the writers of this amendment had to kind of shorten it up. And pretty much what that means in your sense, when you're going to vote for it, is that the legislature actually has the ability to regulate all of these things that they mentioned: consistent legislation, terms, and dates. Yeah. Okay. So pretty much, it allows adults 21 years or older to possess, purchase, or use marijuana products. Again, federal law still states that marijuana is illegal. All this is changing is that in the state of Florida, they will not prosecute you by using recreational marijuana. So I believe currently the possession of marijuana over 20 grams is a felony, and under 20 grams is a misdemeanor, right? So there's still limits on the amount of marijuana that you can possess at one time. But in the Florida amendment, what Florida law would then say, if passed, is that you would be allowed 3 ounces or 85 grams of marijuana with up to 5 grams of concentrate. Again, we already went over what those terms and dates would look like. Let's give you a little background of what recreational marijuana law looks like in the United States. So as of November 8th, 2023, 24 states and Washington, D.C. had legalized the possession and personal use of marijuana for recreational purposes. In 13 states and D.C., that ballot initiative process was used to legalize marijuana. So it would look very similar to what it looked like in the state of Florida. In 2 states, the legislature referred a measure to the ballot for voter approval. So it basically went through the other process of getting an amendment on the ballot. And in 9 states, bills to legalize marijuana were enacted into law, the traditional bill to law process. Florida is one of 10 states that have an initiative process that have not yet legalized marijuana. The other states, there's a whole list, and to save time, I'm not going to go through them, but there are 10 other states that have put this on the ballot and haven't actually passed it into law yet. And that's where Florida Amendment 3 comes into play. So what happens under a yes vote? So first, it legalizes, again, non-medicinal use for 21 years and older, and it allows that possession up to 3 ounces. Now, let's give some opinions. From the Tampa Bay Times column by attorneys John Bash and Glenn Burt, does not forbid the Florida legislature from regulating public use of marijuana. The legislature retains the power to enact regulations that ensures clean, family-friendly public spaces, just as it does with tobacco and alcohol. So again, Florida still has the ability to be able to regulate such products, but it's just legalizing the recreational use in certain capacities. From the effects of cannabis on the adolescent brain, it was a study done by the U.S. National Library of Medicine from 2024. New estimates from legislation allows for quality control and regulation, ensuring that consumers have access to safer products. Additionally, and this is a very important one for that yes vote opinion, tax revenue generated from marijuana sales can be used to fund public health initiatives. So let's see some opinions surrounding Amendment 3 and what a yes vote should mean or would mean. So if legalized, Florida users will have accountability, transparency, and regulations in place. That's a pretty simplistic argument around it. By passing this amendment, it would allow Florida legislatures to be able to regulate and control marijuana and would get rid of that black market sale that we see right now. The amendment does not forbid the Florida legislature from regulating the public use of marijuana. The legislature retains the power to enact regulations that ensure clean, family-friendly public spaces, just as it does with tobacco and alcohol. And that comes from the Tampa Bay Times. Pretty much, this does not mean that Florida becomes a free-for-all state. Certain municipalities and the state itself can still regulate where marijuana is allowed to be used. All it means is that people are allowed to possess it. Legalization also leads to a decreased rate in gangs committing violent crimes. Violent crimes in states where marijuana was legalized have dropped 12.5%. In fact, the continued illicit market sale of marijuana perpetrates a culture of criminality. And that comes from John Bash's article, again, from the Tampa Bay Times. Now, let's go down to what this would actually mean for people that don't use marijuana, but live in the state of Florida. So legalization allows for quality control and regulation, ensuring that consumers have access to safer products. And the kicker, and one of the main arguments for a vote for yes, is additionally, tax revenue generated from marijuana sales can be used to fund public health initiatives and education programs. And that comes from Cannabis Taxation, an article from Adam Hoffer. Pretty much because we are legalizing it and allowing these state licensed programs to be able to sell it, it allows us to tax it. That's going to increase tax revenue. And while we don't have an exact number of what that economic effect would be, we know that this tax would be used for these public health initiatives if passed. But a vote for no. Let's go over some opponents' opinions around Amendment 3. Nick Garley of Medical Marijuana Dispensary, My Florida Green, says, quote, "The medical patent doesn't belong in the same arena as the recreational. Although recreational use will use it for medicinal purposes, but it does get a little convoluted and confusing. And that's the whole reason we want to try to keep it as separate as possible. It's not fair for a recreational bill or movement to step on the heads of the people who are sick, who are debilitated, who are funding these dispensaries. These dispensaries are taking the money to foot a bill to create a recreational movement to create a profit." And again, that comes from My Florida Green, pretty much saying that when we legalize recreational use of marijuana, it will, quote, "step on the heads of those who use it medicinally." And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said in a press conference that, quote, "It's a license to have it anywhere you want. No time, place, and manner restrictions. This state will start to smell like marijuana in our cities and towns." And while the League of Women's Voters does not take a stance on this particular amendment, we remind you to look at the bill itself and both opinions surrounding it. But obviously, for the sake of transparency, let's go over who's supporting these organizations. One being Smart and Safe Florida, who have reported $54.92 million in contributions towards this amendment. And TrueLeaf, a marijuana dispensary company, provided $49.275 million to this committee. So again, while this was a citizens initiative, these organizations were providing significant financial support to get this on the ballot, including ad campaigns otherwise. All right, now let's go to the opposing organizations, which would include the Drug Free America Foundation, Florida Chamber of Commerce, and Floridians Against Recreational Marijuana, which again would all share those opinions around the dangers of legalizing recreational marijuana in the state of Florida.
So next, I'd like to talk about Amendment number 4. And since June of 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Healthcare that there was no federal constitutional right to an abortion, states from coast to coast have been struggling with the decision on how to enact legislation dealing with abortion access. We'll talk about what's on the ballot for Florida. Under Florida law, which evolved ever since this June 2022 decision, we've gone through everything from a 15-week ban on abortions to a 6-week ban on abortions to this current legislation that has been proposed through a citizens initiative. And as you learned earlier, this is no little feat. It takes a significant number of signatures to get this on the ballot. So Amendment number 4 deals with abortion access, and we want to talk about it here in Florida. The law as it is proposed is written to state, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. And that's a key sentence there as well. So what all of those words break down to mean are, number one, it guarantees abortion access until fetal viability. And viability is covered in Florida statutes and means, the stage of fetal development when the life of a fetus is sustainable outside of the womb through standard medical measures. Standard medical measures. It allows for abortions when necessary to protect the patient's health. And the patient's health is determined by their healthcare provider, which is also defined under Florida statutes. And it encompasses it states that healthcare provider means a physician licensed under Chapter 458, again, Florida statutes, an osteopathic physician licensed under Chapter 459, a podiatric physician licensed under Chapter 461, or an advanced practice registered nurse registered under Section 464.0123 numbers. The important thing to remember there is it requires a physician's decision in order to proceed. Again, this legislation or this amendment maintains the legislature's authority to require that parents be notified, parents or guardians be notified before a minor can receive an abortion. If we vote yes for this amendment, it establishes a constitutional right to an abortion before fetal viability. Yes, establishes a constitutional right to an abortion before fetal viability. A no vote would maintain the status quo of banning abortions after 6 weeks with some exceptions. There are organizations who helped to get this ballot on this amendment on the ballot, and they helped collect signatures and offer their support. And they include the League of Women Voters, Floridians Protecting Freedom, the ACLU, and many others. And you'll notice on here that the Catholics for Choice are also supporting this amendment. 69% of practicing and non-practicing Catholics support amendment number 4. And you'll notice on the list of the opposing organizations, Florida Voters Against Extremism, National Center for Life and Liberty, the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, as well as the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops, all opposed this amendment. But again, the majority of practicing and non-practicing Catholics do support this amendment. Next is amendment number 5, and it was introduced by the Florida legislature. And it's entitled the Annual Homestead Inflation Adjustment. The ballot language that you will see states proposing an amendment to the state constitution to require an annual adjustment for inflation to the value of current or future homestead exemptions that apply solely to the levies other than school district levies, and for which every person who has a legal or equitable title to real estate and maintains thereon the permanent residence of the owner or another person legally or naturally dependent upon the owner is eligible. This amendment would take effect on January the 1st of 2025. And I'm sure that language was very clear and everyone understood it, but let's just break it down just a little bit and talk about it. Provides for an annual inflation adjustment for the value of homesteaded property. The tax exemption that would apply here does not apply to school taxes. It excludes school taxes. So what this exemption actually does is it reduces the taxable value of the home by up to $50,000 today. The first $25,000 of exemption would apply to the first $25,000 in assessed value. An additional $25,000 would apply to an assessed value between $50,000 and $75,000 for a total of $50,000. The exemption would allow for an increase in the exemption based on the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, as it would be reported to the Department of Labor. As long as it is a positive value, it would increase the exemption according to the decisions of counties, state, and municipalities in their assessments or through their millage rates. The exemption, again, exempts school taxes, does not apply to schools. The adjustment would take effect every January the 1st if passed. And again, it would take effect in the 25-26 fiscal year, beginning January 1st of 2025. A vote yes for Amendment 5 establishes an annual inflation adjustment to the amount of assessed value that is exempt from property tax. So if your home was assessed at $100,000 and you had the full exemption, homestead exemption, your property value could be reduced, the assessed value could be reduced by $50,000. A no vote would not include the inflation adjustment, but it would keep a measure that was approved a couple of years ago that extends the transfer period of your homestead exemption. If you move from one residence and purchase another residence, you have 3 years in order to transfer your homestead exemption. So a no vote would maintain the status quo along with the 3-year transfer provision. Organizations supporting this legislation is the Florida legislature. They're interested in reducing taxes, and the Senate voted in favor as well as the House in favor by overwhelming majorities. Opposing organizations include the Florida League of Cities, because when you consider the impact of this legislation, it would, through reducing the assessed value of your property, it would reduce the amount of taxes being used or funds being provided to cities and counties in order to fund services, fire services, water and utilities, and so forth. And the impact is expected to be somewhere around $111 million statewide by the year 2028. So there is a financial impact to the cities and municipalities created by this amendment.
6, our last amendment, sourced by the Florida legislature, it talks about public campaign financing. Currently, there is a pool of money available in the General Reserve Fund of our state budget to assist individuals run a campaign. These offices include the governor office and elected cabinet members, the attorney general, chief financial officer, and commissioner of agriculture. In 2022, the expenditure limit was $2 per registered voter for the gubernatorial campaign and $1 per registered voter for the cabinet members. To qualify for these funds, a candidate has to agree to certain terms. There's expenditure limits, and they have to agree to $150,000 raised by themselves for the governor candidate and $100,000 by the cabinet candidates. There are also loan limitations or contributions from their personal funds. Campaign financing data has to be reported post-election. This is the text of the amendment. Proposing the repeal of the provision in the state constitution which requires public financing for campaigns of candidates for elective statewide office who agree to campaign spending limits. As I mentioned, if this is passed by 60% supermajority of those who vote on the amendment, it will repeal the constitutional provision for public campaign financing for candidates who agree to the spending limits and other terms. A yes vote means you want to repeal the provision for public campaign financing. A no vote means you want to maintain the provision in the General Reserve Fund for public financing. And the people who vote for no want to allow individuals with limited funds to run with tax support. These are the supporting organizations. It was voted by the supermajority in the Senate and in the House. These are those organizations that oppose Amendment 6. There are different ways to vote in Florida. You can vote by mail, you can vote early, and you can vote at your precinct on election day. You must be in line by 7 p.m. to vote in person. And bring a photo with your signature as identification. You might want to write down the voter protection hotline if there's any questions or problems. Voting early is not in the same place for every election, and it may not be your precinct. So please check. Again, you need to bring a photo with a signature so that you can have your identification. Vote by mail, also known as absentee voting, needs to be renewed every 2 years. So all vote by mail requests expired at the end of 2022. You must receive, you must update your request and make sure when you get your vote by mail ballot that you sign the back of the envelope. This is a new program offered by the League of Women Voters. It's fabulous. Individuals can get one-on-one personal guidance and assistance to navigate our voter registration system, understand the ballot, decide how to vote. You can contact LWVFL.org to have a voter concierge assist you. Vote411.org is also available online so that you can get a personalized voter guide with the candidates and issues on your ballot in advance. You don't have to wait for your ballot or election day. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have questions, please send an email to speakersbureau@lwvpbc.org. SPEAKERSBUREAU@lwvpbc.org. Thank you.